Hello and a very warm welcome to a brand new edition of World Panorama with me, Frank Pereira, on Rajya Sabha television. Over the next half an hour, we'll bring you a roundup of all the significant events to have happened around the world this week. But first, a look at the headlines. China accuses India of playing dirty by allowing the Dalai Lama to visit Arunachal Pradesh. Chinese media says will answer blows with blows. Unhindered, India asked China not to give political color to visit. Over a dozen people killed in a suicide attack in St. Petersburg. 8 people held in connection with the bombing on the city's metro. Attacker identified as 22-year-old Akbarzon Jalilov, born in Kyrgyzstan. Alleged chemical attack kills over 70 people in Syria's Idlib province. Hundreds suffer symptoms consistent with reaction to a nerve agent. Western nations reject Russia's claims that chemical was released by rebels. The United States retaliates against chemical weapons attack in Syria. 6 people killed as warships fire a barrage of cruise missiles on an airbase. Russia suspends cooperation with US in the country after the strike. A lot of focus on the program this week. India has said that China is unnecessarily hyping the visit of the Dalai Lama to Arunachal Pradesh. The Dalai Lama was on a religious trip to the state this week. The response of the Ministry of External Affairs has come after China threatened to take action to safeguard its sovereignty over Arunachal Pradesh. Dalai Lama too refuted China's charges. Here's a report.
Inclement weather prompted the Dalai Lama to go by road to Tawang during his visit to Arunachal Pradesh. On Wednesday, he reached Bomdila, where he met local residents.
Among the Chinese, many, I think, love India. But some, the narrow-minded politicians, they have their own sort of certain view. So as I mentioned, they consider me as a demon. I don't think nobody considers me as a demon.
China has reacted sharply to the Dalai Lama's visit to a state that's an integral part of India. Chinese Foreign Ministry's Hua Chunying accused India of using Dalai Lama for political purposes and warned that China will be forced to take retaliatory steps. The accusation was readily refuted by Dalai Lama, who said India had never used him as political tool.
India, disregarding China's concern and persisting to arrange for the Dalai Lama to go to the eastern sector of the disputed border region between China and India, severely harms China's interest and China-India relations. China expresses firm opposition to this and will lodge stern representations with the Indian side.
You see, for material development, remain within the people's world of China. It's our interest. And then not separate, so the Chinese government also feel okay, should feel okay. So that's mutual benefit, mutually, like that. And then one time, same time, the Chinese government must give us meaningful self-rule, autonomy, and must take care, full care about environment.
Dalai Lama has visited Arunachal Pradesh more than half a dozen times. External Affairs Ministry said China was creating an artificial controversy to complicate relations. China's extreme reaction comes at a time when it is making inroads into Pakistan-occupied Kashmir, that is a part of India. The External Affairs Ministry is looking at the situation as a ploy to dilute its own actions in POK. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Well, join me for a chat this week to talk about this is RAVIPRASAD Narayanan, Associate Professor, Center for East Asian Studies, School of International Studies, JNU. Thank you so much for joining me on the program. You know, as far as the Dalai Lama's visit to Arunachal Pradesh is concerned, do you believe that the Chinese media is making too much out of this visit?
Definitely, Frank. The Chinese media is, of course, not independent. It is controlled by the party and the propaganda that the media there has to subscribe to. That does involve whatever the Dalai Lama says or interprets as being against the Chinese state.
Do you believe that this is going to lead to a major bilateral confrontation, a bilateral issue between China and India somewhere in the near future? Because the Chinese have been extremely miffed with this particular move.
It will, and the only way perhaps this can be diffused is if there is a mechanism to discuss Tibet at the bilateral level. Because at one level, repeatedly we have told through bilateral statements that the Tibet Autonomous Region belongs to China. We have dropped that now because we have said that maybe 3 or 4 times before. So there's no need to repeat that the TAR belongs to China as such. The second aspect is that this whole issue of the Dalai Lama, it going to Arunachal Pradesh and China's claims on Tawang. China believes that the 6th Dalai Lama came from Tawang and hence Tawang belongs to China. But this flies in the face of what we commonly know as international law, because international law doesn't base claims on historical basis. It begins there. The second is that the Dalai Lama himself is a magnet for the Tibetans who are in the Tibet Autonomous Region in China. And this in very many ways upsets China, because China has not been able to enforce its dominance in the Tibetan psyche, where the Dalai Lama as a spiritual leader, as a temporal leader, has a more important role. Beijing would want to sideline him, which is where they are going to run into difficulties. Yes, it would run into the Tibet issue, especially the Dalai Lama. It will be a more serious issue in the coming years.
Indeed, more serious issue in the coming years, and remains to be seen how that pans out. But do you believe that somewhere in the near future, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Xi Jinping can sit down at the table and talk these issues out and thrash these out? Because Prime Minister Modi has the mandate in India. Xi Jinping is considered to be one of the tallest leaders in China ever. So can these two gentlemen put the egos aside and come to the table and thrash out some kind of a solution?
Absolutely. They need to bring Tibet to the table where it can be discussed, because in the coming years, with the Dalai Lama, advancing in his age, a time has come when the Tibetans have to realize that there has to be a new generation. Now the question is, does the Tibetan government in exile, is it going to be the logical successor in the future? Or, because there has been, the Dalai Lama has said that he is no longer the political leader of the Tibetan people. You have the Tibetan government in exile led by Lobsang Sangye. And secondly, how are the two countries going to handle the issue of Tibet? For instance, Dalai Lama is a picture of moderation. But in the fullness of time, if I may put it politely, is this going to remain as tranquil as it is? Or are there going to be elements who are going to be more vociferous in articulating a cause for Tibet? So it is better for both the sides to sit together and discuss Tibet as an issue. As of now, there are no existing bilateral frameworks on Tibet.
Sure, fair enough. Do you see China somewhere in the near future upping the ante in Pakistan or Pakistan-occupied Kashmir so as to send out a message to India? Because, that's what the Chinese media has been talking about. You play dirty, we're going to play dirty. I don't know where India is playing dirty, but then, the Chinese media certainly seems to be extremely upset with what's happening for the time being. And it seems like there's going to be some kind of retaliation in the near future. And is that going to be by the way of Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir?
Not just Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. When it comes to China stonewalling India's application of membership at the NSG, that is another lever the Chinese have. You also have India's attempts to carve out a greater role for itself in the South China Sea, tying up with the littoral states, the Indian Ocean region. So there are very many, I would say, spheres of competition between the two countries. And Tibet is yet another layer which has now come out into the open. It was always a bit subtle, but this particular episode where the Dalai Lama has gone to Tawang is something which, for the Chinese, has Indians tripping over a red line. And it is for us to assure the Chinese that, number one, the Dalai Lama is free to move wherever he wants within the country. And he is, in effect, the leader, the spiritual leader of the Tibetan people. We are a very different political culture, a democracy. And we do not consider the Dalai Lama as a refugee, but as a spiritual leader of a people, of a nation. And this is where we have to take a strong stand that China has to basically cool its rhetoric if it wants to discuss the Tibetan issue.
Sure, fair enough. And one final question before I let you go, RAVIPRASAD. As this is not the first time that the Dalai Lama has visited Tawang or Arunachal Pradesh. It's happened many times in the past. China has been, upset about it in the past as well. But this time, is it any different?
This time it is different because if you've noticed, the Chinese do not address the Dalai Lama as Dalai Lama. They call him as head of the Dalai clique. Secondly, my question, if I may ask you a question, in the sense what worries me is that why this focus on Tawang? Now, Tawang historically is the place of birth of the 6th Dalai Lama, and that is Sangyang Gyatso. And this Dalai Lama disappeared in Qinghai. And Tawang as such is the second largest monastery after Potala. And Tawang is a treasure house of the Tibetan culture. So why does China covet Tawang? And that the Chinese have not stated very explicitly. And on the other hand, trying to corner India by identifying the Dalai Lama as a root of difficulties is in very many ways hiding the truth that China wants to insert itself into the equation when there is a successor to the Dalai Lama, and maybe they would want the next Dalai Lama, God forbid, whenever that happens, to be very ambiguous, just like what happened to the Panchen Lama.
Indeed, indeed.
So in very many ways, China is trying to hollow out the institution of the Dalai Lama and keep the whole question open-ended and hence decisive. And I find this surprising that for a communist party that is in very many ways atheistic, to take a decisive stand on something which is so religious and spiritual, shows that there is more than what meets the eye.
Indeed. All right. We'll have to leave to that. On that note, thank you so much, RAVIPRASAD Narayanan, for joining us on the program, putting things into perspective for us.
Frank.
And moving on now, post-Brexit, Britain is trying to forge fresh economic partnerships in an attempt to find newer markets once it disassociates from the European Union. In this regard, it has underscored India as a potential market and key economic partner, a theme that was highlighted on Tuesday by the UK Finance Minister's meeting with Indian Finance Minister Arun Jaitley. Here's more.
Finance Minister Arun Jaitley and United Kingdom's Finance Minister Philip Hammond concluded India-UK economic and financial dialogue in Delhi. As one of the major countries working on green technology to address climate change, UK will invest almost £240 million in India. This is expected to be a major boost to UK economy post-Brexit developments.
We have both continued to consolidate past successes and to identify new areas where we can work together over the next couple of years, preparing for the point where Britain leaves the European Union and is able to engage with our Indian colleagues in a deep discussion about a future free trade agreement between the United Kingdom and India.
India has told the UK Finance Minister that the fund will also be used to create infrastructure with energy and carbon-saving devices. The British Finance Minister was also reminded that in 2015, India had set up National Infrastructure and Investment Fund to finance modernization of old projects.
Established the National Infrastructure and Investment Fund, and one of the first major steps in that fund has been taken. And there is going to be a sub-fund with the UK and the NIF participating in it. And this is going to be a green growth equity fund, where both are going to be making a contribution of about £120 million. And this would be financing the energy needs in India. So this is going to be a first major beginning as far as this fund is concerned.
This was the 9th economic and financial dialogue between India and UK to revitalize the economic relationship between the two countries. The high-level talks are taking place at a time when the whole world is curious to see how Britain chooses its destiny in the face of its divorce with the European Union. It is also an opportunity for India and UK to showcase a new partnership, especially at a time when the US is exploring protectionism as an option. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Moving on, now the Russian security services disarmed an explosive device and detained 8 people on Thursday in connection with a suicide attack on a metro train that killed 13 people on Monday. The investigative committee, which is leading an inquiry into the bombing, said in a statement that 6 men were detained in St. Petersburg and 2 in Moscow. It said that the explosive device found in an apartment in St. Petersburg was identical to the one the suicide bomber Akbarjon Jalilov planted at the Vostanya Square station before he blew himself up between the Senaya Square and the Technology Institute stations. The bomb at the Vostanya Square station was disarmed by a security officer before it could detonate. Despite the arrests, it remains unclear whether 22-year-old Jalilov acted alone or as part of a wider network of militants. The news added to an already tense atmosphere in St. Petersburg, the second biggest city in Russia, which until Monday had been spared from any large-scale terrorist attacks. Investigators discovered tinfoil, double-sided tape and other components of explosive devices in an apartment Jalilov rented in northeastern St. Petersburg, but there has been little to explain what turned a 22-year-old Russian with Uzbek roots into a suicide bomber. Well, it's time for a short break now. Still to come, the crisis in Syria escalates. US strikes Syrian military airfield in first direct assault on Bashar al-Assad over chemical weapons attack. Russia suspends cooperation with the US in the country after the strikes. That and much more on the other side. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Kaziranga National Park, a World Heritage Site. 430 square kilometer area sprinkled with elephant grass meadows, swampy lagoons and dense forests is home to more than 2,200 Indian one-horned rhinoceros, approximately 2/3 of their total world population. The park is also the breeding ground of elephants, wild water buffaloes and swamp deer. Over the time, the tiger population has also increased in Kaziranga.
Welcome back. You're watching Rajya Sabha Television. Well, more than 70 people were killed and dozens wounded in a suspected chemical attack in Syria's rebel-held Idlib province. The West claims that the attack was carried out by Syrian government forces. Meanwhile, Russia claimed the attack was carried out by the rebels. Here's a report.
A day after 70 people died in a chemical attack in Syria's rebel-held Idlib province, tributes were paid to the victims at an EU-brokered conference. The UN, which held an emergency meeting in response to the attack, said the incident confirms that war crimes are still continuing in Syria. Injured victims described the after-effects of a huge explosion that killed scores of people. The US believes that deadly sarin gas was used in the attack.
We were sleeping in a house which was hit between 6 and 7 a.m. I went out to help people and they hit the building with chemical weapons and there was a smell coming out. I had trouble breathing and I fell to ground immediately.
The West has rejected Russian claims that the chemicals were released from rebel weapons. The Russian Defense Ministry claimed that a Syrian plane struck a rebel depot producing mines filled with a poisonous substance for use in Iraq. Britain and others, however, claimed that Syrian planes dropped the chemical weapons.
We condemn the use of chemical weapons in all circumstances. If proven, this will be further evidence of the barbarism of the Syrian regime. The UK has led international efforts to call to account the Syrian regime and Daesh for the use of chemical weapons, and I would urge the Organisation for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons to investigate this incident as soon as possible. I'm very clear that there can be no future for Assad in a stable Syria which is representative of all the Syrian people, and I call on all of the parties involved to ensure that we have a transition away from Assad. We cannot allow this suffering to continue.
When I saw the images of babies suffocating from a chemical attack in Syria, I was shocked and outraged. There's no excuse whatsoever for the deliberate attack on civilians and on children, especially with cruel and outlawed chemical weapons. I call on the international community to fulfill its obligation from 2013 to fully and finally remove these horrible weapons from Syria.
Pope Francis also prayed for the victims and called it an unacceptable massacre of innocent civilians.
We look on horrified by the recent events in Syria. I express my firm deploration of the unacceptable massacre that took place yesterday in the province of Idlib, where dozens of defenseless people, including many children, were killed.
Tuesday's attack struck Khan Sheikhoun, where the thousands of refugees are staying. Idlib is one of the last bastions of rebel control in Syria, and it has borne the brunt of numerous aerial strikes despite a supposed ceasefire brokered this year by Russia and Turkey. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha TV.
Meanwhile, the United States launched a massive strike on a Syrian airbase in retaliation to Tuesday's chemical weapons attack that killed over 70 people. The attacks mark a major shift in policy for the Trump government, which till now did not involve itself with the war in Syria. Russia has condemned the US attack on Syria, although the UK, Germany, Japan and many other nations backed the United States' action against Assad's alleged chemical attack. The United States fired a barrage of cruise missiles at a Syrian airbase, from which it said a deadly chemical weapons attack was launched on Tuesday, killing over 70 civilians, mostly children. This was the first direct US assault on the Bashar al-Assad government in its 6 years of civil war. At least 6 people were killed in the attack that marks a policy reversal for President Trump, who had once warned America to stay out of the conflict. Ordering the strikes, Trump said that he was acting in America's national security interest.
Assad choked out the lives of helpless men, women, and children. Even beautiful babies were cruelly murdered in this very barbaric attack. No child of God should ever suffer such horror. Tonight I ordered a targeted military strike on the airfield in Syria from where the chemical attack was launched.
On Friday, the USS Porter and the USS Ross launched over 50 Tomahawk missiles at multiple targets on the Shayrat airbase, which the Pentagon says was used to store chemical weapons. An airstrip, aircraft and fuel stations were hit. Denying the US accusations of waging a chemical war, Syria called the attack blatant aggression and said that it made the United States a partner of terrorist groups.
The Syrian government has sent letters to the UN Security Council many times saying that anti-terrorism associations led by the United States is in Syria and civilians get hurt or even die in many places, including children and women. So if they want to judge with the standards of humanity, they should first judge themselves.
The strike provoked an angry response from Russia that is backing the Assad regime against the rebel factions and the ISIS.
Without bothering to understand what's happened, the United States resorted to demonstration of force, to military confrontation with a country that is fighting international terrorism. It is not the first time the United States of America demonstrates such careless approach.
The strike came just hours after Trump's first meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in his Mar-a-Lago resort in Florida. In the aftermath, China is pushing for a political settlement of the Syrian conflict.
China is always opposed to the use of force in international relations and call for dialogue to peacefully resolve disputes. I have said just now, we are worried about the latest developments of the situation in Syria. We always stick to political settlements to resolve Syrian issues.
UK threw its weight behind the United States, saying it was consulted by the US before the strike. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe also backed the US strike.
Well, we fully support this strike. We've been in close contact with the American government over the last couple of days in preparation for this. The Americans believe they've exhausted all possible diplomatic and peaceful ways of dealing with the use by the regime of chemical weapons.
The Japanese government supports the US government's determination to strongly oppose the spread and use of chemical weapons. We understand the US government strike this time is to prevent further deterioration of the situation.
Both Turkey and Germany also expressed their support for the Trump government, saying that the international community should take a stand against Syrian government's barbaric actions. Bureau Report, Rajya Sabha Television. Well, let's now shift gears and bring you up to speed with some sports news from around the globe in our segment Sports Action. 18-time Grand Slam champion Roger Federer climbed up to the 4th spot in the latest ATP rankings after lifting his 3rd Miami Open title by beating longtime rival Rafael Nadal last week. Federer continued his remarkable return from a 6-month injury layoff as he crushed Spanish maestro Nadal 6-3, 6-4 in the finals of the Miami Open. The win saw Federer move up by 2 places, while Nadal also climbed up 2 places to 5th. Japan's Kei Nishikori, on the other hand, slipped 3 places to 7th. Andy Murray continues to remain at the top spot and maintains a comfortable 4,045 points lead over Novak Djokovic. After West Indies slumped to a 4-match T20 series defeat against Pakistan, legendary cricketer Vivian Richards launched a scathing attack on the country's cricket board. He slammed the arrogance of the administrators in the Caribbean side for the absence of the region's best players from international cricket. Several key players of West Indies, including Chris Gayle, Sunil Narine, Lendl Simmons, Carlos Brathwaite, Kieron Pollard, Darren Sammy and Darren Bravo, are currently in India to participate in the Indian Premier League. This despite the ongoing series with Pakistan. Barcelona coach Luis Enrique has confirmed that he will take a year-long sabbatical like former team coach Pep Guardiola after leaving the club at the end of the season. Enrique is set to leave the club after 3 years, a reign in which he has won 1 Champions League title as well as 2 league and cup doubles. Earlier in March, the Austrian coach had said that he would be leaving at the end of the season. Guardiola did the same thing earlier before eventually accepting the Bayern Munich job. Chelsea recovered from their shock weekend blip with Eden Hazard's doubles securing a nervy 2-1 victory over Manchester City that maintained a 7-point lead at the top of the Premier League. Their defeat by Crystal Palace last week reignited the title race, but Chelsea responded with a gritty display to keep second-place Tottenham Hotspur safely at arm's length with 8 games left. Hazard's deflected strike gave Chelsea a 10-minute lead. Sergio Aguero then levelled with a tap-in after 26 minutes, but Hazard scored again in the 35th minute to restore his side's lead. Mercedes team boss Toto Wolff has backed Lewis Hamilton to exact swift revenge at Sunday's Chinese Grand Prix after a punishing defeat in Formula One season opener in Australia. Sebastian Vettel's comprehensive victory for Ferrari has put Mercedes on red alert ahead of the Shanghai race, but Wolff insists Hamilton has the steel to strike right back after finishing second in Melbourne. Hamilton has previously won 4 times in China, but the triple world champion will be mindful of his sluggish start last season. Finally, dozens of people dressed in costumes and armed with pillows gathered in Hong Kong on April 1st to battle for the 7th International Pillow Fight today. While some were dressed in pajamas, others chose to dress up as cartoon characters to engage in the frenzy of fluff and feathers. International Pillow Fight Today is an annual event held in cities around the world organized by the Urban Playground Movement. I'm going to leave you with these visuals. This is Frank Pereira signing off.